My conversation today features a writer that I found on Substack, pseudonymously entitled Apple Pie. He is a father of many, a writer, and a physicist. He is also someone who's very interested in paternalism, which I'm also interested in. And this is the subject of our chat today. So we discuss how hard it is to balance our impulse towards libertarianism, especially related to raising children. How much can you let them do what they want, and how much do you need to intervene, and how hard it is to intervene in a measured way. They're very different. So we go on a lot of tangents, but I think this is kind of the core, the beating heart of our conversation. As usual, navigating modernity and all of the usual themes of the Subversive podcast. If you enjoy this conversation, which is in full everywhere, please do consider subscribing to alexdeschutte.com, which is my Substack, or to patreon.com/aksubversive if you want to be a patron of the arts. And, as usual, keep the lights on. Enjoy. So I've noticed your commentary, your articles on Substack, where I spend a lot of my time recently. And especially in connection to previous guests' posts, a Wood from Eden, Tuva, which I recommend people listen to. And I apologize for the audio quality of it because it didn't come out very well, but I think it's a very interesting episode on the eternal question of gender relations and what we should do with it now as last men and women on Earth. And I find it really, your perspective really interesting. You are a father of many, which I think is also an interesting, maybe not unique position, but actually increasingly rare position. So maybe we can kind of start with the family angle on this because I have, mothers on. Obviously motherhood is a big theme on my podcast because obviously this is something I think about all the time because this is a water race women. But I haven't had someone speak to me from the position of a very thoughtful in my eyes, at least from your commentary, quite balanced perspective on kind of what the philosophy is of fatherhood. Because I do see a lot of commentary on why men are on more. They don't exactly know how to orient themselves in life, especially towards women and the dimension of family. So I wonder what kind of is your philosophy like. You have a big family. I mean, what prompted that? Because this is today, that's a decision. It's not something that just happens. There is no
Right.
spontaneous huge family, except for people who really don't think about it. And you don't strike me as the kind of person who doesn't think about it.
Yeah, right. I definitely would think about things. I don't know if thinking is always going to give a clear solution or the right answer, but yes, I do habitually think about things. Um, I really, 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 what motivated me to have such a large family, I was motivated even from when I was very young, was simply the feeling that I was alone, feeling that I was smarter than most people around me, that I didn't understand when I was a child that there was a lot of mental illness in my family. I just knew that, like, well, I'm not really connecting that well. I can't turn to my parents. Before, like, very, very early on, they divorced, and it felt. I remember my father coming into the room and saying, "Well, apple pie, your mother and I." And I remember looking at him thinking, this is a big deal for him. He only just now realized his marriage was falling apart. But eventually he went away and let me play with my toys. And I thought, well, I guess that's the end of that. But I've been alone for a long time. And I said, what's the easiest, clearest way of having some friends? Well, I mean, you can make them. And that may not have been the most wisely motivated move, but I was still young when I had planned that and when I was thinking about it. And I just set out to find a wife who did not have any mental illness in her family and who was good and smart. So that's why I became a physicist, right? It's not because I remember talking many times to the other physicists that I've known saying, "Well, you're interested in physics, aren't you?" Like, yeah, right now I'm busy taking a bunch of classes. Right now, this is what's going on. But no, the reason I became a physicist is just to meet a smart wife and to try and have some smart kids who could relate to me. And it worked as well as it worked.
Oh man, that's
That's
an
what,
incredible life strategy. You essentially kind of took the like Wellesley finishing school direction of going into physics, and I think it seems to have paid out, and it seems to have worked out. Like
it worked. It's had. it has been very complicated. It has definitely become something that is much more than I thought it was going to be, because now I have all of these humans around me, and they are their own people. They're very unique, each of them. I want to maintain some anonymity, so I don't want to talk a whole lot about, the ages and genders and so on. I'll just say the dynamic it's interesting just to watch them interact, to see the way they get on one another's nerves, that they like each other. They overall, I would say, relate fairly well to one another. And overall, I have had in the past a fairly hands-off parenting style. For the most part, I just said, like, well, they seem like they should have all the things that they need. They've got plenty of video games, more than I wish that they'd be playing. They've got, clothes and food, all kinds of stuff. I just made them banana bread, right? Like, they're reasonably well provisioned. However, yeah, I guess you have read my piece on libertarianism. That was a very difficult. It was a really painful piece to write. I didn't enjoy writing it at all, and it really prompted a lot of these kinds of reflection of, like, well, how hands off should a parent be? What does a good parent look like? Maybe a good parent should be more involved. And since writing that, I actually have become more involved. And I found it's tricky. It's a lot easier to just say, okay, here's the foundation. Here's everything you need. And I'm here. You can come to me if you need some help. And if you feel like, playing a game, or if there's a real problem, we'll deal with that. There's a difference between that kind of laissez-faire attitude and the sense that, well, maybe I really need to be more leading from the front. And as I stick my nose into matters more, I'm noticing that some of them are maybe not adjusting as well as I would like. Some of them don't play as well together as I would like. And now, I don't know, I feel as though, honestly, really, you were hoping to get some sort of tips on parenting. And mostly, I really honestly truly feel that I'm simply discovering the problems that everyone else has always known, because they were never politically motivated. They were never thinking, oh, well, the best thing to do is to let them blossom, let them grow and explore, and they will be who they are, right? I had that thought, and I don't think I have that anymore. And now I look at them and I say, like, well, maybe they could be doing better in a lot of ways. But what does that mean that I should be doing? Does it mean now I need to be, forcing the little one to eat the food that she doesn't want to eat? Does this mean now that I need to be saying, look, you shouldn't dress that way, or else you will have a lot of difficulty with the members of the opposite gender, right? Like, how do I actually do this? I find sometimes I just hit a wall. Yep. I'll say, I'll say to these kids, look, this is for your own good. And they'll look at me and they'll say, no, it isn't. It just isn't. You just stop and leave us alone. So
Well,
I don't know. I'm trying my best. I truly am. But no, I don't know. I don't think I have answers. I have a perspective, but I don't know if I have any good advice.
no, I think that's essentially kind of what I wanted from you is mostly your perspective. I also realize both in the realm of politics and in the realm of parenting, which is, like you said, surprisingly they mirror each other quite well, because you're essentially kind of the leviathan of this, brood of people that depend on you but also have their own mind. It's a very strange thing to balance. And I'm also, like you, kind of started off with a foundation of libertarianism. And obviously, as a mother, initially I was kind of afraid of the world, because there's just so many things that, can spoil your hard work, or your, at least hard genetic input. And
Hmm.
then kind of paternalism snuck into me, and I'm like, okay, but then obviously executing on paternalism. And I always kind of go back to this, Milton Friedman quote, the "Where are your angels" quote. Because yes, I think paternalism is, in a way, the way to go, especially for children. That's pretty much it. You want to be paternalist, you want to be authoritative as much as you can. But actually, as parents and as political actors and as the Leviathan, we are very flawed. And I think the more you try to scale it up to more and more and more people, your approach, and also seeing how different my own children are. I don't have as many. I have two, but they're completely different.
It's
And
enough.
my approach to them is has to be quite different. Um, you know, alerts me to the problems of paternalism at scale. And there are, I think, just as many problems with the paternalism as there are with the lack of it. And like you, I'm in a bit of a political and parenting, place of confusion, where I just kind of in a bit of a reactive mode because all of my thought out plans about how I'm going to approach this stuff tend to be dissipating away every day because
Mm.
the reality of applying my paternalism to life just doesn't pan out as well as I'd like to. Doesn't mean that it doesn't work. It just means that the execution of it is
Yeah,
much more
right.
challenging than you think.
Yeah, you have to be a person in the moment. You have to know yourself, you have to know your spouse, you have to know what each of you is good at, you have to know what your children are like and how they respond. Sometimes you may find that you just have trouble explaining to one why one can do something the other cannot. Other times you may find that they all gang up on you with your spouse, and then you sort of have to throw up your hands and say, well, I guess I probably just lose because, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's unfortunately the case. That's what I was thinking when I was reading your piece on libertarianism, and it really does, it does make a lot of sense, especially because I feel like because of kind of an excess of liberty that we're all that's available to us all nowadays because of affluence and the fact that it's not just all about bare bones survival and one person making a small mistake means that no one eats or things like that. It's just I think the feedback mechanism of nature was much tighter back in the day, and all of the social technology and cultural technology that we hand around families and communities and all of this was very very useful at that point. But now, given that resources are abundant, or at least they seem abundant for now, um, people just don't react to failure the way they do, and I think a lot of people are just very unmoored because of that. And yeah, the problem is that
That's
yeah.
interesting. That's interesting because I have never really, really been very far away from the realities of starvation, of freezing to death. Now I'm much better off, although we recently had some investments that, to put it simply, did not pan out very well. We're not like we're okay. We've got enough food for tomorrow, right? But no, when I grew up, things were things were very tight. We didn't have like toilets that flushed. There were holes in our walls. That's what I experienced. And I had hoped that when I married Mrs. Apple Pie, that maybe things would go well. However, one way or another, her own parents are, though not diagnosable, her own parents are not good people and haven't been a positive influence either. So we really did this thing where we said, yeah, let's have scads of children, and then okay, but where are the grandparents? Where are the uncles? Where are the aunts? They're not around. It's just us, and increasingly the rest of the society has also become fragmented. When I was growing up, it was really normal to see, bikes in people's lawns. It was really, really normal to just wander down, across the street, wander to the arcade, and just make friends with a bunch of people there. My kids, I keep sort of saying to them, it used to be. It once was. If you just go and knock on the next door neighbor's door, but it isn't like that. They haven't been really trained to do that. And I always feel like, well, I could, just take them in tow and say, okay, here, look, these are the neighbors. I'm knocking on their door. Here you are with me, right? I just don't want to be able to be quite that heavy-handed. I'm afraid that it might not work. And then it would be like, well, see, Dad, this is a dumb idea. The way things are now, I can't say go play with your friends. They don't have, mostly what they have is each other. They are the same way that we are in their general dislike of, I mean, maybe not a dislike of technology, but they don't like cell phones any more than we do. They don't like just using technology just because. They don't like sitting down. They'll talk about it. They'll say, I'm sick of YouTube because the last time I was on it, it sucked me into a pit for 30 minutes. I'm just not going to go back. So they're the same that we are in a lot of different ways. But I look around at the world in which they live and I can see like, well, this is kind of what was encroaching on me. It's strange in a way to see where I grew up in the American Southwest. I feel as though there was a kind of creeping existential debt, sort of like what you talked about, or what you've alluded to anyway. The sense that, well, we don't live in a world of scarcity anymore. So you know what? We'll just say what we want, do what we want. We'll just kind of go around. And it seems as though without that threat of scarcity, people don't make friends. You know, when you asked me to talk to you, I thought, well, this is really weird. I don't know what she wants from me, but I'll tell you, I was excited because someone was wanting to talk to me. And I found out a little bit about you, and I just thought you were really interesting, right? That's why I've been looking forward to this conversation because, wow, I have a person who I can see. Sorry, you can't see me, but I have
All
someone
good.
I can see, right? And we're having a meaningful discourse. This kind of thing, it seems like it's really disappearing, and it's maybe moving on to Reddit among complete strangers. You know, these kinds of connections that used to be so ubiquitous are now becoming tenuous, are becoming rare. And I don't know what to do for my kids. I look at them and I say, like, well, I guess you've got each other. But is that I remember I didn't like the siblings that I had. Not really. And I can imagine, like, if my siblings are the only people, that would have been a pretty dismal way to grow up. I really wish that I could have given them something better. And it's just totally beyond my control. It's something that I cannot influence at all, except to say, like, well, maybe you should try going on this field trip that you were thinking maybe you wouldn't go on, because maybe there will be someone of the opposite gender there, you know? It doesn't, it sounds just like that when I say it to them. I know they're savvy enough, they're sophisticated enough to know he's trying to get us to do this thing. And it's going to be so boring, right? They're not, you know, all of those natural ways for friendships to grow and blossom. They're falling away. And I'm so frustrated that the university system is gradually becoming, it's going bad itself. I really want to say to my kids, you should do what I did. You should go to college and then you should get a degree. But on the way, you should get married, right? I want to tell them that's where you find really, really good people. That's where you find them. But anymore, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, the purpose of this podcast was just to be able to talk to people that I wouldn't be able to talk to in any
And to
other
let me
way.
vent. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly it. Like, sometimes people complain that, there's no like guiding theme through the podcast, but most people do like they just want to listen into on conversations with people that they find interesting. And that's what I'm here to provide. I'm having the conversations for you. And
Right,
if you
right.
like
Well, I
it,
mean, my blog is that way too. Like there really is no theme, and I'll encounter different kinds of people depending on the post that I make. You know, I'm getting a heck of a lot of pushback on philosophy, which makes me really grit my teeth because man, that's the thing I want to talk about most. However, everyone hates it, so I'm thinking like, well, I don't know. You know, I was depressed for the last year or so, and I didn't do the things that I usually do, which were, you know, like make music and write stories. But gosh darn it, through it all, I modded Castlevania. So, so like, you know, maybe I'll put that up. And I have no idea if anybody will like it or not, but yeah, that's the kind of things that I do are also quite varied. I just, I'm just a little bit transparent, which is maybe weird because I insist on being anonymous. And I find it's becoming harder and harder to be as broad and as sincere as I am online and not have it leak over into the professional world. It's getting to the point where I have to really draw a line and say, okay, no one at work knows this, no one else knows that. And so, right, like before this podcast started, I was talking to you about Romania. I had to remind myself, don't mention to anyone at work about anything involving Romania, because then, right, if they saw this, then I mean, chances are minimal, right? I'm such a little gnat, and yet I know the way that things work, specifically in the venue in which I work. I know that I cannot have an online social life. That would definitely come back to bite me in the bottom. So
yeah. Especially if you want to be, if you wanted to serve the purpose that you have it for you to actually be able to vent, to be actually be able to be honest and, present yourself in a way that you can't in your real life and to connect with people that relate to that aspect of you. Yeah, I mean, it is a complex thing. I mean, I've always been a face poster, so to say, because I just always felt like I didn't have a lot to lose. Maybe that's a very wrong thing to think, but being from like this backwater here, I'm not. I talk to people in America, people in my real life. They know vaguely that I have a podcast, and no one listens to it. It's just it really is so remote, this whole universe that I'm participating in. It's so interesting to me and so uninteresting to a lot of people that I deal with, that it doesn't affect me. And I've been lucky to not necessarily depend on the income from this, and that's why this podcast is going to one direction, then it's coming back, then it's going all over the place. So I can use it to actually perform the function of talking to people that I'm interested in the moment, rather than feeding an audience something that they really, really want, which I haven't been doing so much. Not
What's
that,
the political
yeah.
system, or I'm sorry, what's the political situation like in Romania? Is it as much of a minefield? I don't think that it is.
It draws inspiration from what's going on in wider Europe, and
Hmm.
they're
Okay,
essentially
so
kind of it's a similar pattern. Though Romania is kind of in a unique situation, because we don't really yet have what's going on in wider Europe, like the tensions with immigration, but we do have kind of a nationalist movement rising here as well. Um, it is an interesting place to be in terms of politics, but it's not. Um, I don't know. It's not as polarized because there's just not that much to be polarized about. Like I said, there's polarization coming in from outside because everyone's marinating in the same internet, and they're trying to pattern match. Who is the Trump, who is the Biden, onto local
yeah,
politics.
yeah,
Um,
right.
but it's not as serious. I mean, I feel like people take politics in far off countries a bit more serious than they do here, because it feels like the stakes are lower. Pretty much, I think the European Union has a lot of influence in what goes here, and they just won't let us be too loose with our politics.
Mm,
And people still, respect the European Union because we get a lot of structural funds, and we are a satellite state of the EU, and people still like it, so they're not rebelling against it because there is quite a lot of benefit from it. Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, I myself am not as plugged into local politics as I am to international politics, and even there, I'm not as plugged in as I used to be.
appreciate it while it lasts. I don't know enough about the situation. All I know is that Romania is one of the trailing countries culture-wise in terms of rising individualism or post-materialism. However, it is that researchers have defined it or decided to investigate that. There has been a definite movement in the direction of this kind of ease of living in these sorts of modern. I really wish I had a word like cosmopolitan. Maybe captures it. The sense of a rising individualism
Mm.
that has taken everything in such weird directions, and that now results in a lot of enemy and disaffection, and in people who are at least superficially happy. But I just take a walk. I just go outside with I go outside with my kids, or I take them to the park, and I'll see other people, and they're not looking around. They're not they're not even talking to each other. They're just sitting there scrolling through their phones. I can remember even when it started. I remember it was in college. There was a year when I would pass people and I might say hello, or what are you like? We might have some kind of a conversation. And then it was single semester when all of a sudden phones were everywhere. And I was walking around going, well, this is really weird. I guess everyone's doing this now. And I've become increasingly strange in that regard. I've got a cell phone, but it's the family cell phone, right?
Mhm.
That's it. And sometimes I have to carry it and I grumble when I do. And sometimes my wife has to carry it and she grumbles when she does, right? This like dislike of cell phones weirdly is become a sort of, it's, it's becoming like a defining characteristic of our family, that we just don't like them. Laptops, they're great. Desktops, hey, video game systems, all right. But oh man, the cell phone. Let's engage with the world that's around us. At least that's the way we feel. I don't know if you have an opinion. It doesn't bother me that other people
Oh,
use them. It bothers me that other people like their souls are sucked away and into the screens, and it seems like there's just nothing there.
no, I have a lot of opinions about it, because in big part, this podcast and a lot of the kind of infrastructure and my presence online, all of this, was built off the fact that I was addicted to my phone. I became a power user of the platform Twitter.com, now known as X. And that's essentially kind of, there's this whole world of discourse that I'm suited to. I'm a talker, and I was just yapping for hours upon hours on this phone. And obviously there's a huge upside for me because I do make some income off this, not immense. I'm still waiting for my Russian check, but it's still it's something it's given me a lot. But at the same time, now I'm in a phase where I'm I just weighing the costs. I mean, there are immense costs, like you say, and I dislike the costs, and there's a pressure to be present in discourse. And I know that if I'm not, because I do take breaks from it, I feel like it really kind of disconnects me and it makes the podcast worse. And I'm less of a good commentator because I'm not as sharp and witty, and I don't pick up on whatever is in the zeitgeist as I used to be when I was just like mainlining it all day. And I don't know if the cost is worth it, but at the same time, it's extremely entertaining. We were talking about video games. Well, I have no relation to video. I never play video games, but this is my video games. It's essentially Call of Duty for people who are good at talking, and it's extremely entertaining, but it has it has huge costs. So my position to it is that I have a almost strange, like alien like respect for it and what it can do to me. And I appreciate the upside. Like, we wouldn't be talking if I didn't stumble upon these platforms and yap my face off for years. um but at the same time, I've hours upon hours a day, every day for years. It's a huge cost. And I don't necessarily want to do it. And the problem is, talking about paternalism, I don't feel like I'm able to moderate. I feel like I can be on it or off it. Plus, it has a certain kind of half-life within me. If I'm plugged into it for like 3, 4, 5 hours a day, it lingers. Like, even when I'm with my kids, even when I'm still debating stuff in my head with whatever random user X, or it really takes from you even when you're not on it, which is a price that I think people underestimate. And I feel like, you were talking to people who look at their phones, but I feel like people have more vacant stares even when they're off their phone because they're kind of still partially living within whatever entertainment milieu that they spend their time in. And I don't know, I feel like there is a movement now, like people, you're not the only person who has a family phone. I've talked to people who really rebel against it, but it's a minority perspective. And you were saying in one of your articles that you see that people wouldn't agree that this is a good thing, but they're also not rebelling against it. So I feel like a rebellion is coming, and I feel like a lot of Gen Z kids, like younger kids, don't like it. They realize that it's doing harm to them, but they're kind of stuck in these bad equilibria. And I feel like there's something will come in. There has to be one push of agency from the parents and the kids together to break out of these equilibria. The problem is a lot of kids essentially are stunted and they're not able to act, like you said, in real life in the way that they'd like to. So they're kind of bouncing, back and forth through social life and coming back to the phones or coming back to whatever the video games because it's more comfortable. They just don't have the tools to do it. So I don't know. I really hope that this is just kind of the the preface to something bigger, to a pushback that's bigger. But I don't know if it's the state. I don't think the state should be involved in this because they have no idea what they're doing.
Yeah, I've spoken to my wife about this. I used to be very hopeful about Gen Z, and now my sense is that they're pretty fragile, that they're so disconnected from one another. They exist in this state of I didn't even know how to describe it because I don't live there, but I can see them and I read the statistics and I can tell, all right, well, this is what's going on. There's a lot more depression, there's more anxiety, and there's more general feeling of helplessness. If their parents are able to do something, yeah, that might be good. I'm frankly not sure how the Gen Z parents are going to do anything without involving the state. To me, it just doesn't seem like ideally there would be some sort of grassroots movement and someone would start saying, look, we're not going to be controlled by these things anymore. We're going to use them for ourselves in the way that we want. I'm willing to believe that cell phones have that these kinds of digital technologies have remarkable potential. And you can see that potential unfurling in podcasts like this one. But when I look at the mental health of Gen Z, they just don't seem like trailblazers. They don't seem like the ones who are going to be able to do it. But talking about this kind of thing isn't Gen Z just an American thing? Isn't Gen X just an American thing? Do those terms even have any meaning in Romania?
I think they do because, I mean, the internet is an American thing, but the internet is global, and everyone's just, yeah, they're consuming the same slop everywhere. So, yeah, I think, this generation of Romanian children are, I think, just as American as they are Romanian, especially the kids of, the middle and upper middle classes. It's inevitable because, entertainment products that come out of Romania, I mean, give me a break. There's no such thing. And if there are, they're essentially just scripts taken from shows that were successful abroad and then, loosely translated to local customs. And most of them are watched by older elderly people so that they also can partake in the American miracle of entertainment. But most kids,
Alex, that makes me so sad. I
I know.
hate hearing about how the soul of people just languishes like this, and that like I know what America puts out, right? I have Netflix. I can see what's there. Every once in a while, there's some interesting programs that like come out of Turkey, or there's come um oh gosh, where's the Kaiser? And do you know that one, the Empress? Where's that one? It's in the Czech Republic, I think. It's set in Germany. You do find some foreign films that are good. I haven't come across anything from Romania though. I
They
I
are.
talked to my I talked to my kids about this, and I've said, there ought to be something should be done, perhaps a 1 year lag on things. So if you are living in say, I'd say Germany, say then you can be a content creator, you can do all kinds of things, you can make songs, you can make shows, and you don't have to compete with everything that's coming out right now. You only have to compete with what was released 1 year ago. My kids don't like the idea. I don't know, that pretty much died as soon as I said it.
Yeah, it's
But I
extreme
really,
paternalism.
I would, right, I would love to know that Romanians were being Romanians. I would love to know that Russians were being Russians, and that, people from Egypt were doing their thing. It's very rare that I come across interesting literature anymore. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's just that maybe it's just I'm not very good at looking. My website is called, or my blog is called Things to Read, and ever since I started it, I regretted it because I keep looking for things to read, and I don't find the things to read. It seems like there's just not much out there. There's definitely a lot of visual content. There's a lot of music, and I would say really I can complain. I complain a lot, but the music that comes out nowadays, I find extremely compelling. I think that I would have been much happier if I'd had this quality of music that I could just sit down and listen to when I was growing up. As it was, my goodness, I didn't. I had. I shouldn't give details. I'll just say there was a marked paucity of worthwhile songs to listen to. When I was a kid, it was just, I didn't even know that music could be as good as this. And it's weird maybe to say that, because it seems like a lot of the stuff that's out there is kind of schlocky, but it still at least sounds fun. Whereas for some reason, the movies it produced, they're also schlocky, and I can't stand them. I don't know if you, I don't know if you watch a whole lot of, if you watch much that's out there, but if you ever listen to The Critical Drinker, you can probably get like my attitudes in a nutshell on what modern cinema has become.
Yeah, yeah. It is interesting because, it's a country like Romania. If you look at what its artistic output was, essentially, the height of artistic output from Romania was between the wars. maybe a little bit earlier than that. It was the time when Romania still had a king. It wasn't a democracy in any way. Before communism, communism obviously was very much party aligned schlock. But
Right.
before that, we had a moment. But that moment also was essentially in large part a foreign import, because there just wasn't the intellectual infrastructure here for people to even have the idea of creating certain formats, certain media. Like people who actually became creators or people who studied in Paris and Berlin, which were the kind of cultural
Yeah.
center. Now the cultural
Right.
center is the internet and the lingua franca is English. So a lot of the culture that we have here in Romania now is an outgrowth of the melding between this huge pot of culture that people aspire to and what's available locally. And in a way, it spans, it spawns forms of culture that wouldn't have been possible without it. I don't know what it would look like without it, like completely detaching, but I think it would be impoverished in the sense that people just don't have the inspiration. Like and even in philosophy, there's kind of this whole idea of kind of authenticity, of originality, of where exactly does the spark of creation come from, and if one should like lock themselves up from the world and just wait for something that's completely intrinsic to bubble up from whatever source of creativity one has, or if it's essentially a collaborative effort. Now today the collaboration essentially just happens online. You can go to the center. That also helps, obviously, rubbing elbows with the great creators of the world, and a lot of people do that. But if you don't want to leave your home country, typically the new forms of art are just kind of they bounce off each other in English, in American media, on the internet. So I don't know exactly. And yeah, I think certain media just, like you're mentioning movies, I think just the audience size has increased, and there's all sorts of constraints nowadays because of you have to appeal to a much wider audience, and you have to appeal to them on streaming services, and there's all sorts of essentially problems with how movies are marketed. That just, I think that at root is why a lot of them are schlock. But I think there's
Mm,
a lot of independent movies, like you said. There's so much music that you enjoy now. I think there are things that exist, but you're probably not being marketed those things. You have to be really diligent in searching them out, and who has the time? Yeah, it's a tough one. I remember I had a movie subscription at one point, and they have lots of foreign films and stuff, and they had really good stuff. But yeah, it's very much like art house cinema, and there's much more of that nowadays than there used to be. But also that also has like weird schlocky things in it. So yeah, if you're a cinephile, you just, yeah, you have to put in a lot of search work to get it. But I'm sure it exists out there. Um,
Mostly what I found, I do put in a lot of effort. The most recent movie that I discovered that I really liked was White Zombie. I think that was probably a better performance by Bela Lugosi than his more famous in Dracula. I really liked that. I don't know. I don't know that I would recommend it to any of your listeners, because it's only for a certain sort of person who likes, old black and white movies. That's a lot of what I find that I do. I look back at things that you were even produced before I was ever born. Like a few years ago, someone online mentioned The Invaders, and I'd never heard of it before, and I looked it up. It it had it had I don't know. You keep using the word schlock, and I probably was the first person to use it, and now I'm going to use it to describe invaders too. But it was a lot of fun. I've seen that many times since. That's what I find really is worthwhile. Typically, if I go digging around anything that is on today, it's no good, and I'm not sure why. I just find it very dismaying. And I'll say something else. You mentioned that even when there was this kind of flowering of Romanian culture, that a lot of it came from people becoming educated in Western Europe. I have an increasing sense that this kind of globalism that we experience is not actually even particularly new. I was watching, it was a long time ago. I wish I could give a better source for this than just, I remember seeing a documentary. But I remember seeing a documentary where they talked about how there were Greek amphorae that were the prized possessions of various wealthy people in what is now like Central Europe. That at the time it was dominated by people that are known as Celts. But when I saw that, I said, that's so weird. Why are these Celtic people, why are they importing all of this pottery? The answer is, well, they can. They're gonna get the best that they can. So that's where the best that they could was coming from. It seems as though what really matters is never place, but always just time. There was a time when Samaria was in. There was a time when Egypt was a thing, and then eventually it was Greece, and then Rome, and currently it's America. But the center of it just sort of wanders around. It's more, if you want to know the character of a person or a place, you have to know when it was. And as soon as you know when it was, then you know, oh, well, this was on the outskirts, like where you are, or this is closer to the center of things, like New England is in the United States. Even that's not as much the center. I suppose you could probably say the center is really in like California, probably. Others might argue that it's New York. But that's what it seems like. It feels like moving away from California. It felt as though I had gone back in time a little bit, and it was heartbreaking because I loved it when I moved away, and everyone said, "Oh yeah, we're 10 years behind here." No, we're 20 years behind. But I watched as around it was around the time when COVID hit. I watched in the same kind of polarization, the same kind of insincerity, technological obsessions, the same kind of sort of social fragmentation. It seemed like it followed me, not too long after I left. So it
Yeah, no,
seems like
that's
it just continues, right? Yeah, go ahead.
it's such an interesting observation because that's it's always a joke here, and this is a joke that people make about Bulgaria, about Romania, about Albania. Everyone has this joke here in Eastern Europe that when you cross the borders, because we still have borders here, to Eastern Europe, that there's always a sign that you have to set your clock to 50 years in the past because
So
yeah, that's
so does it get better or does it get worse when you do that?
depends if you're over modernity, as many people in the West are, but people say it here as a joke to denigrate, the fact that the Eastern Europe is still retrograde. They do still aspire to the future, and the West is still seen as the future. Obviously, people have different complaints about the West as well, but it's still seen as something that we aspire to, and yeah, I think it's tough. I realized that someone in your comments mentioned the family that moved to Russia because they were, I don't know, they had an
I
issue with
remember. Yeah.
American
Yeah.
politics, and then they moved there, and then now they're kind of in poverty, and they're kind of destroyed by Russian bureaucracy. And I think this is kind of a tension that a lot of people don't realize, that a lot of these places would be like America were it not for things that are actually problems. A lot of people think, oh, the Russian people, they're very religious. They're full of this kind of ineffable substance that people have lost in the West. But actually, no, they're not really. And this is
Right.
the case for rural places here as well. They don't have enough of the affluence and the institutional capacity that they have in the West, or they would be just the same.
Yeah,
Or
no,
whatever.
exactly. That is very well understood by sociologists. Have you ever heard of Ronald Inglehart?
No, I have not.
There's a cultural map that it's kind of fun. You can find it through a pretty quick Google search if you look up Ronald Inglehart cultural map. There are many of these maps that were done on the basis of surveys. It started out as a European values survey and then eventually became the World Values Survey.
Hmm.
And he carried out a factor analysis. He didn't. There's a lot more to culture than what he's found, and we can say various other things about it. However, if you can just find one of these maps, they're really easy to find. You can see Protestant Europe at towards the right, where all the money is, and you go further and further left and get countries that are poorer and poorer, that's one of those very well-known findings, that countries become more, whatever you want to call it, post-materialist, individualist, whatever you want to call it, they become more of that thing as they get more money. When people are poor, well, they band together, they value those kinds of relationships. They're also generally pretty, how would you put it? They're pretty parochial, right? Like that family who moved to Russia, from America, they moved to Russia because they were sick of the kind of toleration of homosexuality that went on in America. So yeah, right. Like this is what it is like as you move into areas that are poorer. People are not particularly tolerant of ethnic outsiders or of, interesting sexual proclivities. These things, it's almost as though the money and all of the wealth has sort of revealed, in a sense, what people are really like, what people will do if they have the ability to. It seems as though they'll just kind of, they'll give their consciousness away. It seems as though what they long to do is just become really embroiled in something. And whether or not that something is, the latest controversy on Twitter, or whether it's, how they're doing on their video games, whatever it is, it's hard to find people who will sit and look around and not be occupied with anything. Even right now, I mean, obviously we're very occupied with one another, but I guarantee you, when I'm done with this, I'm going to go take a walk, and that's it. I'm just going to take a walk, and I'm going to think about the things that you said, because that's just the way that I am. When I'm allowed to, when I have the opportunity to do so, I notice that everything that I want to do is so different. I want to be alone. I want to write or draw. I want to think. I want to run around. I want to climb a tree. The kinds of things that I want to do feel to me very different from what I notice other people doing. And I'm not really sure why that is. I look at psychology a lot and I say, well, I don't know, maybe it's because your openness to experience is higher or something. But all I know is that it is definitely a clear difference. And I can say, to sort of bring the conversation maybe back around to the beginning, I can say that having kids, I can see that they are, in general, one way or another, like me in that regard. They are not the sorts of people who want to just waste their lives. They're not the sort of people who are satisfied to accept what's given to them and not think about it. They are they're very interesting. They're very present in the moment. They're very real that way. And I really appreciate that about them. And I appreciate that about you. I've really enjoyed this conversation with you. I don't know how much time you have left, but it's been, I found it very rewarding, and I would love to hear a lot more about Armenia from you in the future. How much time do we have left?
I typically go for about an hour and 10, 15. So we still have about half an hour if you have the time, obviously.
I don't know if I have the time, but I can stay a little bit longer. I guess it's because
Okay.
we started late, isn't it?
Yeah, a little bit. Well, you know what? I think this is a good place to round off now, but I think we can continue this maybe on another episode if you have the time, because I really do enjoy your input, and I hope you write more and get out those drafts and put them on Substack. And I don't think it's you shouldn't be constrained by anything, because as long as you manage to keep your anonymity a little bit, everyone enjoys your public journal, because I think that's the role that this plays for me. And even though I have my face out there, hopefully my freedom from consequences continues. But yeah, I think that's a good thing. But the last question I ask everyone on the show is that, do you have someone that you recommend, someone that you read, like you recommended Engelhart, his value survey, but maybe there's someone that's been influential in your thinking that you think people should read more of or explore a little bit, because yeah, that's how you were recommended on this podcast, and maybe you have someone like that on your own.
Unfortunately, I'm afraid that the person that I'm going to recommend cannot be found.
Oh.
I was definitely inspired, I mean, by a lot of people and a lot of things. But one of the biggest influences on my blog, especially early on, was Sarah Perry's work, Every Cradle is a Grave. She has, as far as I can tell, dropped off of the face of the internet. She has some posts and some articles where she posts under the handle literal banana, like a literal banana is saying this. If you can find her, if you could interview her, I would definitely listen.
Oh, that's
I just
really
don't know if you could.
interesting. I have encountered her work before when I was researching antinatalism for a different project. It never panned out, but I thought it was very interesting, and I approached it as someone who is a pronatalist, and I was a bit kind of bristly but I kind of got captured by a lot of kind of the antinatalist work, and part of it was her work, and for me it seems like it's kind of a valence of perception on the world. If you're the kind of person who, forever, whatever reason you have, your genetic makeup, just the accumulation of experiences that you've had, can look at the world and be honest about it, and say this is good, then you end up on the pronatalist side, and then you become a pronatalist philosopher, and you want to make more of yourself. And if you
Yes,
have
yes,
essentially,
right.
yeah, and then if you have the opposite, which you could say it is bad, then you end up in but the thing is, the line between the two can be quite flexible. So I think I was staunchly on one side, but then looking into it and reading a lot of this work, I can understand that perspective. I've just had a good life, and I see that that's some people, their tally on the pros and cons side weighs much more towards the negative, and I can see how you can conclude that it wasn't worth it. So yeah, it's an interesting recommendation.
That's yeah, that's I think you're absolutely right that antinatalism and pronatalism, it obviously requires a certain amount of thoughtfulness. A lot of people are just whatever, we're just going to have how many kids or not. But I will say that the questions that she raises, although I think that she's wrong in the long run, because, and I hope I don't get, maybe she'll hear this and then have something to say about it, but I'll just say it anyway. I think that antinatalism in the end is a mistake, because even if we presume that the system is terrible, that life itself is flawed or bad, what is evolution going to do? If all of the antinatalists, if all the thoughtful people sit down and say, you know what, we're not going to have any children anymore, well, then they're simply ceding the grounds of existence to people who don't think about that at all, or to people like us who say, okay, well, maybe life is good. So antinatalism in the long run, it does not have a future. The Shakers are now gone. There are all kinds of movements that did not reproduce themselves, and then they are gone. Whereas Tova likes the Amish a lot. The Amish, I know the Amish. They're nice people. They seem really not very, like, if you actually get to know them, they're not very interesting. They don't have much to say. They just have a lot of kids. The only thing interesting about them is that they have a lot of kids. And you and I can say what we like, and we can think what we like, and we can do what we like. But we're not going to have as many kids as they are. You are buffered somewhat geographically, but in the United States, just wait 100 years, 200 years, 300 years. There's going to be a lot of Amish rolling around in their carriages.
Yeah, I mean, if they're culturally robust as well, like, because they also have a bit of defection, not as much as other cults, but still, yeah. I really wonder. I keep thinking about this whole idea of, the religious will inherit the earth, and it's a question of how really impermeable to modernity they are, and I know that some aren't. At least the Mormons aren't. The Mormons have dropped under replacement. So, but yeah, they are much more cosmopolitan, obviously, than the Amish. But yeah, it is interesting. Well, I'm not going to keep you around very much, but I think in terms of antinatalism, I also want to make one recommendation of my own. This is a book that's haunted me for a while, and not that it's made me an antinatalist, but it's a fascinating book. It's a I don't know if you've read it, the Thomas Ligotti book, I think the Case Against the Human Race. It's
The case against the human race.
Yes, I think that's the name of the book. It's by Thomas Ligotti. He's a horror writer, I think, a horror fiction writer. But essentially, it's almost like poetic fiction, not really poetic nonfiction. And it's yeah, I can't really say much about what it contains, but I think it could make for interesting reading for people who are thoughtful about our position in the universe. And you can see that it's written by a horror writer because essentially the perspective is of someone who considers the human race from kind of almost like this H.P. Lovecraftian, like what exactly is it to be in existence? And he shines a light on all of the body horror of creation. So I don't know. I enjoy that type of stuff. I like that. I also like those type of movies, the Cronenberg-y type stuff. So maybe that's just me. But if anyone's interested in that, I recommend it. You could swear at me in the comments on YouTube if you think I'm insane, but it's a cool book. So yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to chat to me. This was really a lovely conversation. I want to point people to your Substack. You're at Apple Pie on Substack. I will put it in the show notes. Is there any other
Actually,
thing that
I'm
people
at Things to Read, but
Things
yeah,
to
you
Read,
can
yes,
find me
but
that way.
Apple Pie is you are the person, and Things to Read is your Substack.
Yep.
Okay. Perfect. Well, thank you so much, and yeah, this was lovely.
No, I agree. I really appreciated the opportunity to talk to you. You gave me a lot to think about, and evidently you've given me a new thing to read, which is just about the
Things to
very
Read. Perfect. If you've enjoyed this conversation, please consider liking it, leaving a comment, subscribing, doing whatever positive interaction the platform that you're listening on allows. And if you'd like to become a patron of the arts, please do go to alexkashuta.com, which is my Substack, for the complete archive of everything I've ever recorded or written, and on patreon.com/AKSubversive if that's more your style. Thank you so much for supporting me, and see you next week.